Chapter 19. Love's Interlude.
Child, hear me, child.
Hela stared about blankly. It was black as night, without a glimmer of light for her to distinguish the ground from the sky. She looked up. Suddenly, the sky came alive. Two enormous red eyes opened to fill the heavens.
Child!
The voice crashed like thunder around her. But as she screamed, Hela shot upright, wide awake, dripping with cold sweat. It all came rushing back to her as she struggled to make sense of her surroundings. After the incident at the altar, Fald had offered Farah, Senna, and herself accommodation in a guest house on his father's property. Hela hadn't spoken to Skature after he threw her to the ground and murdered Toren in front of her eyes. She never wanted to speak to him again. After that, she had loaded her cullmates onto Drom's back and followed Fald away from him. Anywhere was better than near that psychopath. She wiped her face and neck with the bedsheet while replaying everything in her mind. It was all such a blur. The climb up the Hallhorn, walking the streets of Arunt, the beacon of unity, Adun declaring her the avatar of Grom, then Toren. Toren's revelations were even harder to accept than what had preceded them. Skature, the man who had taught her how to wield her flame, the man who had protected them in the Battle of Cull 19 and the ambush at the outer wall, the one who led her to freedom and a new life outside the reaches of Epol. Skature was a Thutan killer. Worse than that, he had used children like herself, like Senna, as suicide bombers. How could she reconcile these two men as the same person? She had trusted him completely. Had those other called children also trusted him? Was that the way he twisted people into dying for him? Her feelings fought each other, and she didn't know which of them made more sense. There was no way she could go back to sleep. Not even her dreams, the only place she used to be able to hide while in the culls, offered her a reprieve from the horrors following her. She got up and checked on Senna, who was sleeping on the other side of the room. At least Finn can sleep, she thought, watching his chest move up and down. He's too innocent for this stuff. I don't know how he stays so positive. I'd melt at his age if these sort of things happened. With Senna's safety confirmed, she eased open the door to the room and left the guest house. The deck outside offered a breathtaking view of the surrounding mountain range, even though the night sky was only lit by a half moon. Drom, who was curled up on the deck, perked up and moved over to lie at Hela's feet. She sat down on the edge of the deck and hugged Drom with one arm that didn't even reach to the other side of the massive hound's back. "Is this place what you thought it'd be, Drom?" she asked her companion rhetorically. Drom looked over to her, licked her face, and curled back up. "Yuck! Thanks, I guess." Hela chuckled as she swiped the slobber off her cheek. "I don't know anymore," she sighed, answering her own question. "Is everywhere in this world just as messed up as the next? I haven't found an end to it yet." As Hela leaned her head against Drom's thick, warm mane, she heard floorboards creak from behind her. Both she and Drom turned to assess the sound. It was Farah, walking out onto the deck. "Can't sleep either?" Hela asked her. Farah sat down beside Hela, leaning herself against Drom like a backrest, and shook her head. "Even though your new boyfriend gave us warm beds?" she teased with a half grin. Farah punched her in the shoulder and huffed. Hela giggled, then Farah smiled back. "He seems nice, Farah. Maybe you can borrow some of his sweetness." Farah rolled her eyes, still grinning. Light was bleeding across the eastern edges of the mountainous horizon. "I don't know what the morning's going to bring after what Skature did last night, but at least we don't have to stay with him for now." Hela shrunk into herself after that last statement. To her surprise, Farah put an arm around her and pulled her close. Hela must have slipped off into a dreamless sleep while curled up against Farah and Drom. When her eyes snapped open, the sun was rising, showering the scenic panorama with vivid colors. This time, an actual voice had snapped her out of her sleep. "You know, the beds work better when you sleep in them. At least, that's the strange custom I grew up with." Fald's messy red hair, looking like he'd never seen a brush, filled her view as he bent over to wake the deck sleepers. Drom turned his head and growled low in his throat. Whoa there, boy," Fald responded, backing up 3 steps with his hands outstretched. "I've made enough breakfast for you, too, and I promise it'd taste a lot better than I would." Hela put her hand on Drom's head and shushed him. Farah stood up at the sight of Fald, hair and face disheveled, and waved sheepishly to greet him. "Well, good morning, beautiful," he replied without a hint of sarcasm. "You're a much more welcome sight than Hela's furry toothball." Hela scoffed. "His name is Drom, and his teeth are his best quality." "If you say so, little avatar," he replied, raising his eyebrows. "If you want to use your own teeth, come to the main house for food. Maybe go wake your brother, too. He's the only one that seemed to figure out the whole bed thing. Farah and I will meet you two there." He reached his hand out towards Farah at that proclamation. This guy sure is forward, Hela thought, turning to go wake Senna. Farah didn't seem to mind at this point. In fact, the speed at which she accepted his hand led Hela to believe that she liked it. Farah had endured enough in the last week. Hela was genuinely happy to see her enjoy something. She roused Senna, who didn't take any convincing to get up at the promise of another morning meal. The two walked the short stretch between the guest house and the much larger main house. They entered the open door, and a voice from inside beckoned them to an adjoining room. "Hurry, you two, before Farah eats it all!" Senna giggled and rushed to the dining room. As Hela also entered the dining room, she saw what, to her, looked like a meal made for a king. So many eggs, sizzled meat, bread that looked like it was made that day. Farah and Fald were already seated and served up. The joke he'd hollered at them before was funnier, seeing that he had even more food on his plate than Farah did. When the siblings approached the dining table, they noticed another person at the head of the table. It was an older lady, and judging by her own red hair, she had to be Fald's mother. "Please, children, come fill your plates. You're most welcome here," she gestured. Fald spoke up, food in his mouth. "Oh, Hela, this is my ma, Ardeen. Pa will be back soon, so eat what you can, 'cause once his fork gets into it, it's all over." "Oh, Fald, stop it," Ardeen admonished with a smile. "We're just very blessed to have you and your brother here, Hela. We were at the recitation last night, and apart from the nastiness at the end, we're all very excited to learn of your special appointment." Thank you very much, ma'am," Hela mumbled. "I'm still trying to sort out all of that. Sorry for the trouble Skature caused. I had no idea about the things Toren spoke of. You have to believe me. Until last night, I thought Skature was a good man." "Oh, dear, you must be in shock. You'd probably never seen anything like the rite of Kuloth performed in the Culls, I'd imagine." Hela's mouth twisted as she realized the woman had misunderstood her. "No, ma'am, I hadn't, but I meant what Toren said about the culled children. I never knew any of that." "Oh, well, dear girl, Grom works in mighty ways that don't always make sense to us. Her will is still with Skature. The Kuloth proved that, so whatever he had to do in Epole must have been her will as well. But let's not dwell on such terrible thoughts. It's a beautiful morning, and I'm so blessed to be feeding Grom's avatar, her adorable young brother, and Fald's beautiful new friend, Farah. My heart is full." Hela couldn't believe it. She tried not to show the shock on her face that she was feeling in her heart. Did this woman just excuse Skature for child murder? She thought. What kind of morals do these wild Thutans have? Just then, Hela's thoughts were interrupted by a deep voice.
"Quite a thing it is. Gonna be a busy day, no doubt."
The voice belonged to a thick, burly, balding man who walked in behind Hela. "Uh-oh, you waited too long, Hela," Fald stated. "Take what you can. It'll all be gone soon."
"Oh, shut your jowls, boy,"
the man barked at Fald. "Only if you will, too," he retorted, pulling a plate of eggs away where the man was sitting down. "Oh, honestly, Fald, leave your father alone," Ardeen scolded with eyes twinkling. Hela could see the resemblance in Fald's face, but his father, surprisingly, didn't have red hair himself. Just a ring of short black hair. Though, by the look of his arms, he made up for the lack of his head everywhere else. The man reached out his hand toward Hela.
"Name's Jordan. Pleasure to have your party here in a runt."
Hela reached out and shook his hand. It felt as rough as tree bark. He looked a little confused, expecting to have grasped shoulders.
"Fald and I tend the hounds of the village. I saw you've already melded with one of your own. Lucky girl, you. Great stock. I can tell he's Carthage line. Built tough as hardstone, them."
"Thank you, sir. His name is Drom. We only melded a few days ago, but he saved us already during our escape from Epole." Jordan plunked down in his seat and started gathering all the remaining food he could reach.
"No doubt, no doubt."
Fald looked at Farah beside him with eyes wide as if to say, "I told you." She covered her mouth while she shook with laughter.
Sure to be a transfer of barrack today after Toren's ceremony,
Jordan muttered as he piled up his plate with meat and bread. "How do you think they'll do that, Pa?" Fald asked. Jordan looked up from his food at Fald, then eyeballed the plate of eggs his son had pulled out of reach. There was a moment of silence, then Fald rolled his eyes and pushed the eggs over. Jordan smiled and answered his son's previous question.
Adun will have to make a call about that. Up to him. Few different ways we can go with it. Never know. Maybe one of these other called kids will get him.
Hela noticed Farah looking sideways at Fald, who wasn't explaining what they were on about. When he didn't pick up on her silent confusion, Farah slapped the back of his shoulder and shrugged at him. "Oh, right. Pa's talking about Toren's hallhound, Barrack. He'll need a new owner now. If he doesn't get melded soon, he'll go a little nuts without Toren to connect to. Nobody wants to deal with a nutty hallhound. They're way too toothy for that."
"Seen it before,"
Jordan added with a mouthful of food.
No good. Nope. Poor things go feral."
Ardeen interjected. "You should all come down to the altar after the meal. They'll be preparing a dedication ceremony for Toren. It's a beautiful affair, very Thutan. They would all appreciate having the avatar there, Hela." Hela flinched at the suggestion. I don't know, ma'am. I don't feel comfortable being around Skature right now." Farah waved to get attention, then started patting her chest. "What's that, dear?" Ardeen asked. "She wants to go," Fald said with nonchalant certainty. Farah nodded vigorously. "Why, Farah?" Hela asked, puzzled and a little annoyed. Farah started motioning with her hands, trying to mouth her words with wide, exaggerated movements. Everyone at the table seemed entranced, trying to figure out what she was attempting to convey. When she stopped, there was a silence. Fald finished the bite that was in his mouth while everyone else was struggling to decipher the message, then said, "She wants to go down and see if Adun will meld her with Barrack." Everyone looked at Fald with shock, then to Farah, who nodded with approval. "How does he do that?" Hela thought with amazement. "I'll take her down if you don't want to, Hela," Fald continued. "I want to go too," Senna chirped. "Oh wow, the little guy can speak," Fald said. "That's a smart kid. He learned how to speak and how to sleep in a bed in one night." Hela frowned at Senna, ignoring Fald's humor. "Finn," she started, but Fald cut her off. "It's fine, Avatar. He'll be with me and Farah." "Oh, you really should go down, dear," Ardeen said again. Hela was frustratingly outnumbered. She would have had no problem sticking to her resolve if it weren't for her own little brother weighing the scales against her. "Fine, I'll go to watch over Finn, but I'm not talking to Skature, and I don't want him to either." "Oh, wonderful," Ardeen said. "I do think you'll enjoy the ritual of it all. And Adun will be there too. He's the best person to talk to about any of your questions concerning last night, or any other Thutan traditions for that matter." The last part was something Hela was already considering. I'd love to know what this elder has to say about it all. Surely he isn't okay with murdering Thutan children. By this point, Jordan had finished all of his food. In fact, all the food on the table. Fald whispered something in Farah's ear while pointing at his father that made her snort and cover her mouth again. Everyone helped to clean off the table and then set out, as a group, towards the town circle once more. Walking down the main street in daylight offered Hela a different experience than the night before. All the carvings, reliefs, and tapestries that adorned every building and archway were now visible. Ancient heritage bespoke every structure, making Hela feel small. As they drew near the town circle, the site of horrors mere hours ago, a crowd of villagers were already assembling near the altar. When Hela was close enough to see the altar through the throng of people, she noticed Toren's body propped up on top of it, wrapped in white garb except for his face. However they had propped him up, he seemed both noble and at peace. Maybe that's the only time we get to have real peace, Hela thought. Then the vision of Toren's screaming, impaled face from the night before betrayed today's facade in her mind. "I think we should all sit near the front for this," Ardeen suggested. "Look, there's a spot with enough seats for us all." "No," Hela protested immediately, causing Ardeen to recoil. "Look, Ma," Fald said, pointing to an open bench in the middle of the right grouping of pews. "How's that one tickle your fancy, Avatar?" Hela shrugged. "Perfect. I'll go warm it with Farah." He grabbed the older girl by the hand. "You look like you got a watcher to speak to first." Fald pointed to a beaming Adun, who was making his way through the people to Hela. "Be nice now, Avatar," Fald snarked. If I have to, Red, Hela retorted. Dear Hela, oh my, I am just so delighted to see you this fine morning, Adun proclaimed, reaching his hands out to grasp her shoulders in welcome. Hela let his invitation linger for a moment before returning the gesture. Yes, well, Senna wanted to see the funeral, so I'm here for him. Oh, blessed girl, this is not a funeral, not in the Rayan tradition. We honor our dead with celebration for their service to Grom. There is no need to mourn or lament those whom she has called to her loving embrace. Hela rolled her eyes before she could stop herself. She didn't dislike Adun per se, but his pious sentiment didn't square with the reckless murder he had sanctioned only a few strides from where they stood. I'll be sitting over there, she said, using her arm to move past him in an obvious attempt to dismiss herself. But I'd like to talk to you afterward. Yes, of course. There is much to discuss, of course, Adun said, almost speaking to himself as he bowed and returned to the altar. Hela, Senna, and Fald's parents found their way to where Farah and Fald were already sitting. Not a moment too soon, either. Drum beats began almost immediately after they had taken their seats. At that cue, everyone else also sat down as Adun took his place in front of the altar of origin. O ye of Irunt, faithful and observant, Adun started, requite once more thine own embers to the unvanquished flame of mighty Grom this day, for we bear testament as her heirs to the precious flame of her son, noble Toren of Alta. Though he be already returned to her bosom, we celebrate his reticent obedience in life unto death. Adun's flame rose, pulsating to the beat of the drums, along with the flames of those gathered in response. So that we may not remember the body, yet admit to history the memory of valiant Toren, we commit to ash his flesh, and to glory his name. At that final line, the drums came to a roll. All of the Thutan's flames rose in intensity with them until a final boom, when the drums ceased and the altar of origin ignited with a furious blast of steady flame. Toren's body became a blurred silhouette in the center of a painfully bright inferno of fire. Hela watched soberly as the silhouette faded away, ash rising high above the towering flames. She didn't know Toren well, but she respected the man for the way that he had stood up for his values. Regardless of the backward traditions of the Hullhorn, he had spoken up for Grom's innocent children in the culls and wagered his life for them. The fire upon the altar petered out, revealing no trace of Toren's body. Adun raised his hands and looked up at the sky, shouting, "You are remembered, Toren of Alta, child of Grom!" To which the congregation stood and responded, "Grom's love!" Hela looked around for Skature, but he was nowhere in sight. The thought of him not being there bothered and comforted her at the same time, but only because she didn't want to interact with him. Everyone sat back down as Adun spoke up once more. "An envoy shall depart for Alta later this day to notify them of Toren's ascension to glory. In the meantime, there is one task left remaining. Beric, Toren's faithful Hullhound, must be melded with another warrior before the end of Solus V. Farah straightened up where she sat, as though she was going to be called up. Adun continued, "A Hullhound rarely outlives their owner, yet the process of remelding does hold precedent in certain tales of remembrance. As such, a living warrior of the fallen's comrades is the first choice. Only Skature of Irunt and Carter of Panth remain, and both warriors have themselves their own melded Hullhounds, so we must determine and anoint a new warrior to hold Toren's place." "Oh, wow, didn't see that one coming," Fald said. Farah looked at him, frowning, spreading her arms wide in a confused gesture. "A new warrior," he answered bluntly, as if that explained it. "Adun needs to appoint a new warrior." Farah's annoyed glare intensified as she shrugged. "Oh, right, you probably don't have warriors in a pool. Why would you? You were slaves there. They wouldn't want warriors in that case. I thought you'd understand what an anointing is, like everyone else." Fald's continued lack of explanation looked to be killing Farah at this point. "A tournament shall be held," Adun shouted. "A tournament," Fald said. I was getting to that part. A tournament is held to determine a new warrior. It shall determine the new warrior, Adun added. Okay, Fald said, looking at Farah. Maybe you should just listen to the Watcher. Farah rolled her eyes and then turned her attention back to Adun. Word shall be sent to all of the tribes. This time on the morrow, we shall host a tournament of the Horn to anoint Grom's newest warrior, Toren of Alta's successor, and Beric's new master. Any here today who would like to enter their name for a runt, meet me at the altar of origin before you leave. Adun raised his hands out to his sides. At that motion, everyone held the shoulders of those beside them and spoke in unison. Grom's love! Those in attendance then stood and began to mingle or disperse. Farah stood up to walk to the front of the altar. Senna, who was sitting between her and Hela, also stood and took Farah's hand. Farah seemed surprised at the gesture, but didn't stop little Senna from guiding her through the crowd towards Adun. He seemed excited for her to enter. Hela and Fald now sat alone, their companions having both abandoned them. Hela looked over at him and said, So, you really like Farah, hey? Fald just tracked Farah visually while replying, Yep, a lot. He stood up to get a better look at where Senna was guiding Farah. Anyway, I'm going to go follow them, he said curtly. You coming? Yeah. Hela thought she would blindside Fald with her forward question, but his matter-of-fact response surprised her. What a strange guy, she thought, chuckling under her breath as she followed him toward the altar. Adun was waiting in front of the altar when Farah and Senna got there. Farah was half expecting a line of people all adding their names to the tournament, but they seemed to be the only ones there. Senna tugged politely at the hem of Adun's sleeve. Excuse me, sir, he chirped. Ah, yes, young one. Hello. You are Hela of Kull's younger brother, correct? Adun queried with a smile. Yes, sir. Hela's my big sister. But this is Farah. She's from our Kull too, and she wants to do the tournament for Beric, sir. Oh my, I see. Is this true, Miss Farah? Farah straightened up and nodded vigorously. Adun looked at her, then at Senna. Senna spoke up. She doesn't speak, sir. She lost her voice during our escape, but she's very tough. She'll do her best to be anointed. Farah looked down at Senna with pride, and then back at Adun, giving him a brusque nod. Well, you see, Adun started just as Hela and Fald arrived. Hi, Watcher. She's with me, Fald interrupted, reaching out to grab Farah's hand. Her mouth twisted as she looked back at him, unsure why that mattered. Adun continued, I was just going to explain to Farah here that the tournament is only open to those of the Hullhorn. Being that she is only a visitor here, unfortunately she is ineligible to enter. No, Fald retorted. I mean, she's with me. He raised her hand in his. We may not be united yet, but it's definitely happening in the future. Ask my parents if you like. They're right over there. But since we're together, she qualifies as a representative of a runt through our house. Farah was gaping at Fald now. Adun said. I see. Yes, indeed. It is unusual, but this does, in effect, qualify her. So be it. I shall enter Farah of a runt as a qualified competitor. But if other competitors of a runt also apply, they will take precedence, I'm afraid. Fald grinned. Oh, we both know that's not going to happen, old Watcher. Scatter's the only warrior we've had in 3 generations. No one else around here is pushing through the crowd to qualify themselves, are they? Farah couldn't hide the confusion on her face while Fald kept speaking for her, and for them. I suppose you're right, young Fald. I cannot think of another resident who would step forth to desire anointing, Adun admitted in a quiet voice. Excuse me, sir? A small voice spoke up. It was Senna. Yes, little one, Adun replied with a polite smile. Senna looked over to his sister, then to Farah, and back at Adun. I'd like to enter too. Musings of the Watchers. Rarely, but on occasion, a melded hullhound may outlive their Thutan master. In such a case, due to the unbearable grief of the animal for their deceased master, one of 2 actions must be taken. Either a transfer of melded warriors must be enacted to prevent the insanity of the beast, or they must be destroyed.